Welcome to this Vivid webinar titled Performance Engineering as a Competitive Differentiator. Today is the 11th of May, 2016. My name is Todd DeCapua. I'm here to host our event today. This webinar is being brought to you by the Vivid Worldwide Performance Engineering Special Interest Group, also known as the PESIG. You can see that I'm the champion of the group here. You can see also all of our Twitter handles here if you would like to get in touch with us. There's three leaders. I got Chris Trempler from Independent Health, also Petar Puskarich from NTT Innovation Institute, and rounding it out is Paul Shavlin from Checkpoint Technologies. Along the bottom you can see the bit.ly link if you're looking to learn more about the Vivid PE-SIG. Again, I have the opportunity here to host this session today. I am a Chief Technology Evangelist with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and my entire career has been shaped around performance engineering, and this is probably one of my greatest passions. I am also joined today by four experts. I'd like to give each of them the opportunity to quickly introduce themselves so that you might get to know them as well. We will start with Kishore and then move ourselves from left to right on this slide. Kishore, to you.
Hey guys, morning gentlemen and ladies. So this is Kishore here. I hope you all can hear me clear. So about myself, I've been a performance engineer for a very long time, and pretty much my entire career has been into the performance engineering space as well as the QA space of it. And pretty much I do the enterprise performance engineering services within NBC Universal. So that's pretty much what I do. On to you, Brian.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good day, everyone. I'm Brian Kalese. I am the head of enterprise performance engineering here at Biogen. Biogen is one of the leading life sciences organizations to provide and bring life-saving drugs to customers, patients, nurse practitioners, the general population of the globe. Some of the drugs that we service and provide are directly focused at hemophilia, Alzheimer's, and most importantly, multiple sclerosis. I've been in the engineering field for over 15 years, and it's one of my passions to bring to the industry. Over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Brian. Hello, everyone. I'm Alan Kornkoff. I actually have the best job in the Boeing company. I'm the chief engineer of the Performance and Scalability Group. My group has enterprise-wide responsibility for performance testing, performance engineering, and performance technology management for Boeing worldwide operations. I've been in the performance field for 23 years. Over to you, Andre.
My name is Andre Bondi. I am the founder of Software Performance and Scalability Consulting, LLC. Before that, I was at AT&T Labs and Bell Labs, and for a roughly equal amount of time, Siemens Corporate Research in Princeton, New Jersey. In all these places, I was in major performance roles, providing consulting and R&D support on performance engineering. And I am the author of a book, Foundations of Software Performance Engineering and Systems and Scalability. This came out in 2014, published by Addison Wesley.
Well, on behalf of Vivid Worldwide and also the community of performance engineering, I would like to very much extend my thanks to all four of you for all the preparation leading up to this event, and just for everybody who's participating. I can tell you the preparation was quite fun, and the conversations and dialogues that we got into was very engaging for me. So again, I really appreciate all of you participating today, and look forward to keeping this going. As some quick housekeeping, you will see that today is the live session. It is being recorded. The recordings are available to all Vivid members, as will be the download of this deck. You will see that we will move very quickly through much of the content so that we can get to some interesting conversations. But again, this content also being available to you on the Vivid website. You'll get an email containing links to that information following. Any questions that you have, please type them into the questions pane. If we do not have time to get to them today, the panel has suggested that they'd be willing to answer these offline and then also post them and make them available for all Vivid members. As far as the control panel, hopefully this is something that's reasonably easy for you to use, but you can see where the question and chat section would be, also how you might go ahead and interact with a few other components. Most importantly, though, wanted to show you the questions and chat section. For today, again, a brief agenda for you. What is performance engineering as a competitive differentiator? Also, when done well, what are the results, and how can you implement these starting today? Throughout this webinar, we're going to be doing some participant polling. I would encourage you all to participate and participate very quickly. Again, you'll see that the questions are not that challenging. And then at the end, if we do have time, we'll be answering some questions live as well. The format that we're going to have is going to be going through each of these 3 top questions. Each of the 4 expert panelists will be providing, about, a minute's worth of their ideas that they have on a prepared slide. And then we're going to move through all 4 of those. We'll get into a discussion slide at the end of each of those sections, where we'll spend roughly 3 to 5 minutes kind of having a little bit of a collaborative session. So with that, let's get started with our first poll. And I will go ahead and read this off. This is going to be a multiple select, so you can select as many needed. But what is your organization's biggest competitive differentiator? Again, you can select as many as you need. And again, as this panel we were preparing, we said, these would be some great answers to have. So time to market, quality, being a low-cost provider, high value being delivered, also longevity or lifespan of a product or service. This was something that specifically, as Alan was bringing to light for us, the amount of time that they have to have documentation to support all of these Boeing products is something that is significant in their market as well. So again, please go ahead and answer these questions. I know, Petar, you're going to help facilitate this and close it out. I'll hand it to you.
Hey, great. Thanks, Todd. Yes, we currently about 65% have voted, and I'm waiting for that to round off a little higher here, but within a few seconds we should have some numbers. Preliminary looks about right, though, so we'll see how this looks in another, 10 seconds or so get your votes in. Okay, go ahead and close that one out. Okay, so it looks like we've got, the lead actually changed a little bit, so now it's a high value at 68%, followed by quality at 64%. Then we drop off down to longevity at 43%, and then time to market, and then low cost. So cost was actually the lowest selected.
Excellent, Petar. Thank you very much for facilitating that. Kishore, I was just going to reach out real quick. Any ideas or thoughts as to, what you would have expected to see here, and again, seeing high value at 68% and quality at 64%, and maybe why our participants would have responded that way in this poll?
So in general, the industry best standard, as the attendees rightly selected it. It's the high value for performance engineering and the quality. Those are the 2 values that I was seeing that they would get the highest polls, and followed by time to market. So these days, agile is everything. So I was expecting time to market to be number 3, and followed by longevity and obviously low-cost providers like the last one in the poll that I was expecting. But pretty much this is exactly what I was expecting. So it's good.
Excellent. Well, with that, I'm going to move us right into our first of 3 sections. So again, this one really looking at how is performance engineering a competitive differentiator. And just as a quick reminder, each of the 4 expert panelists spending about a minute on each one of their slides. I'll go ahead and move them through for them. And Kishore, you're up first.
Sure. So there's a lot of text here, and a couple of things that I wanted to point out here is my point number 1. What is performance engineering, right? So performance engineering, if you think about it, it's our practice which is going to granularize the high-density computing that the development community, the architectural community, and pretty much everybody tried to build on. It is us who try to generalize and telling them where exactly are the problems, where exactly things could potentially go wrong, how scalable is their solution or whatever. So that kind of like is a path to quality by itself. So if you look at the diagram, I said like, okay, you have a time to market, you have scalability, you have quality. So that's one portion of it. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is pretty much if you think about the development community. I mean, I'm not against the development community, but pretty much most of them, they are into like, okay, let me follow a framework which has been designed. Let me try to follow a white paper practices. But it is us who try to help optimize these white paper practices so that the product that comes out is a quality product, and the time to market is also like, really good. And we also create the faith and consensus by demonstrating a proactive impact. So with that said, these are my top 3 line items that I'm thinking about.
Great, thank you, Kishore. Brian, what are some of your thoughts on how is performance engineering a competitive differentiator?
So I want to go back to the poll question. The high value isn't a surprise to me. If you look at it from a performance engineering standpoint, I mean, that ultimately is the premise of the discipline. Being able to define measurable impact that is visible across the organization. So many times I hear when I'm in project team meetings, when I ask about what are you looking for from a performance standpoint out of your project or out of your application. And I can't tell you how many times I hear, well, it needs to perform equal to, if not better, than what we currently have in production. Well, that doesn't necessarily align to the whole engineering discipline. We need to define the measures, define an approach around how we can establish and obtain those measures and drive team accountability in through the organization. And I think that's a key point, making sure that all teams are accountable to the non-functional requirements and the quality expectations, just like Kishore just mentioned, and ensuring that we're able to obtain them and establish them. And how do we do that? We do that through bringing in automation into our workflow delivery processes so that we can create those efficiencies and then in turn obtain the high value. How do we do that? We also can use technologies like virtualization to adjust the dials as we go through our execution cycles, using tools like service virtualization or network virtualization to really get out in front of our to-be deliveries well in our pre-production settings so that we're not sitting in a production mode. And the picture at the very bottom is really what we continuously hear, well, it worked fine in test, and then once we moved it out into production, it failed miserably, and we've got a fire that we have to fight. And the performance engineering discipline really brings that competitive differentiator to an organization to minimize those impacts and streamline the approach. Off to you, Andre.
I'm waiting for my slide to come up. Or was Alan next, actually? Thank you. Okay.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. Well, but the performance of a system by itself is something that differentiates it from the others. One could think of performance engineering as being an effort to mediate between the user's impatience or desire for capacity and the system owner's avarice, need to contain costs. But apart from that, one of the things that makes performance engineering a competitive differentiator is that when you integrate it into the entire life cycle, from the time that you specify performance requirements and define the metrics that you're going to be using to quantify performance, you're mitigating business risk. You want the performance requirements to propagate into the architecture and design decisions so that you have an incentive to architect for scalability and performance testing and thereby reduce the performance risk and shorten your time to market. It's also worth remembering that performance, availability, and reliability go hand in hand. So you're being more efficient about assuring the reliability and availability of your system when you're doing performance testing as well, because if you structure your performance tests wisely, you can actually reveal reliability and availability problems as well by seeing inconsistent patterns of performance behavior.
Thank you very much, Andre. I know there was a lot there, but I love how you delivered it. Alan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I have a slightly complementary view to my colleagues here, but I really resonate with many of the things they're saying. My customers are typically business and system owners. They're not IT people. In fact, they pride themselves on that. They don't have a need for performance testing or performance engineering. What they're really looking for is the benefit that I can deliver with performance engineering and performance testing, and that's risk management. Performance engineering ensures that they can put an IT system into production with known and manageable business and technical risk. That's what it means to them. When I started the group that I'm in about 23 years ago, the majority of the systems we worked at Boeing were developed in-house. Now the majority is developed outside, and we do the system integration. This may involve managed services, COTS, off or nearshore development. But the reason for doing that is not just cost, it also lets us shift the risk to the supplier. But to be able to do this, we need to ensure that the supplier can meet our quality of service criteria. And we do this by having the suppliers test their offerings to our testing standards. Now they can do self-test as long as they show they meet our standards, or we can use our testing lab in partnership with them. What I offer to all of you is that this is the ultimate shift left. We always talk about how can we move to the beginning of the life cycle. This is the shift left because now performance engineering is a differentiator as early as proposals, supplier evaluations, and work with suppliers even before the contract is signed. So that's how we use it as a differentiator.
Thank you for that insight, Alan. Now, next I had set aside potentially, I think it's going to have to be more like a 2 or 3 minutes, but I don't know if we want to have a brief, group discussion just on all 4 of those different perspectives, but I'll hand it over to you guys, as to how is performance engineering a competitive differentiator. Maybe the question that we need to contemplate, do you think organizations today have really looked at performance engineering as a competitive differentiator or not?
My suspicion is that many organizations, this is Andre, many organizations in the marketplace have not really done that. Many of them view performance engineering as consisting of solely of performance testing, build it, then tune it at the end, and so on. I think it's only in recent years that the approach that Alan and Byron and I have been advocating, and perhaps Kishore too, where you do the performance at the very beginning, at the proposal stage and the inception stage, is beginning to take root. It is absolutely critical to do something like that, while also keeping track of what your targets are, so as to mitigate the business risk that Alan was talking about. We have no better example of that kind of risk than what happened with the rollout of healthcare.gov in the United States. We knew that it wasn't functioning properly because it was very, very slow. And if they'd allowed adequate time for performance testing and so on, that risk would have been severely reduced. And by the way, there's work out there by Len Bass and others at the SEI in Pittsburgh showing that performance is the single biggest risk to a software project.
But Andre, I think what you're really saying though is that in that case, the organization really was attempting to test quality and at the very end of the cycle, and from a performance engineering mindset, it's really building it and designing it and having it architected right from the onset, and even in the development phase, conduct performance samplings so that you ensure well before you get into your formal test execution cycles how the application is going to behave, and address it very early on, and then in turn, and then once it does get into the production setting, we continue to sample and incorporate those production results back into the next development cycle so that you're continuously enriching from a performance engineering standpoint.
Absolutely.
That is correct. I mean, from my, just adding on to what Brian and Andre presented here, many of them, at least in my X number of years of experience, what I've seen is like pretty much performance testing is more of a checklist item for them when it comes to a toll gate process, and they don't see the value of what the performance engineering practices bring to them. And more and more we performance engineers, when we start evangelizing, telling them, hey guys, here is your risk, here is your, going back to Alan's point, it's pretty much the risk assessment and the risk management aspect of it, and trying to tell them, guys, this is exactly what it is. I mean, in the recent couple of years, I've seen organizations are trying to mature towards and understand what value performance engineering actually brings to the table so that the product that goes out is actually a quality product. So based on my experience, even within NBC Universal itself, there are still a lot of groups where we go to them and we tell them, guys, start involving us right from your architectural discussion itself. So that we try to see how we can do a better manage between the entire life cycle of it and release the quality product out.
Exactly, and I think that ties back to the comment that I made about defining metrics. It's having those metrics defined at that phase so that from an architectural standpoint, the organization knows very early on what its expectation is, and if they're not able to meet it at that point in time, then they refactor there versus downstream after the product and the delivery has started and it's matured.
And the fact that we can start introducing these concepts in performance engineering further and further to the beginning of the cycle is the key here, because this enables us to reduce cost. It's first-time quality. The earlier you can catch a problem, the less costly it's going to be to resolve it. If you have an ill-fitting COTS or your software doesn't scale, if you're early in the design cycle, you have many more options to fix it, and you can look at many more alternatives. The longer you wait, the faster the concrete begins to set towards production, the fewer options you have, and the more costly it becomes to fix things.
Absolutely. For that reason, it's a very good idea to do preliminary tests and benchmarks of the technology platforms that you have in mind so that you can weed out those that are unsuitable. And so that you can catch problems early, and it's even to the benefit of the suppliers of the off-the-shelf software to understand that we're doing this, because then they have a chance to improve their product and make it better for their entire customer base.
Bingo, Andre.
Exactly.
Bingo.
Exactly.
It's a win-win
Exactly.
situation.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win. Yep.
Excellent. Thank you guys for that great discussion. I'm going to unfortunately have to move us to our next poll. So this is going to be poll number 2 for those of you keeping track. The question here is, considering everything else is the same, how will your organization differentiate themselves? Again, you can go ahead and select as many as needed in this polling question. As we were coming up with it, some ideas that threw out, function or functional, performance, security, disaster recovery, and high availability was one that was about quite a bit. Lastly is integration. So Petar, over to you to manage this question.
Yes, we got about 35% voted. Early on, it was 100% selected performance, but that's now changing, and things are balancing out as more come in. I was quite excited about that. We'll see how this ends up here in about another 30 seconds. Okay, we'll give it a little bit more here. We're getting close to 75%. All right, go ahead and close that out. Looks pretty good. All right, so we started out at 100% on performance, but it still was the winner at 81% selected. Then we came down to 56% at security, 53% for function, and then rounding out the bottom two in order, the disaster recovery and high availability at 39% and integration at 36%. Back to you, Todd.
I know.
Todd, can you still hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay.
And to the speakers, if you could go ahead and mute yourselves while you're not talking, there's some definite feedback and it's really disruptive to our audience. and we apologize for the audio. Go ahead and mute until you have to talk, please.
Or the noise, is that coming through? Is there any way you can reduce it? It's distraction.
All right, Brian, are you there?
I am here, Todd.
Would you be able to comment on those polling question results?
So I'll be honest, that's actually a little bit interesting to me, and it may be because we're in a performance engineering webinar. You know, most organizations are really starting to drive towards feature and functionality, but I can see where performance will take a very lead approach, because as organizations are looking to push product out through function, performance will be the lead breadwinner from an overall delivery standpoint. And then if I look at the customer base, customers right now, we all know that if we're at a browser and we're not seeing a response on screen, that within less than 1.2 seconds, they're either hitting the F5 key or they're going up to the URL bar and they're re-entering the URL and launching the browser again to get the app to paint. So it is a little bit of a surprise, but I'm happy to see that performance overall did take a lead for this poll.
Excellent. Kishore, I was going to see, we're going to walk right into the, you know, when done well, what are the results? And I know you're covering results as it would relate to the organization where you are today. So Kishore, I'll hand it over to you.
Sure. So thanks, Todd. So when done well, what are the results, right? So I see it as two different, if you look at the images, one is operational excellence, where you're trying to reduce your technical debt. And the second aspect of it is you increase your quality, you are trying to, you know, increase the speed to market, which is your time to market. Your efficiency goes high while your cost goes down because you're trying to reduce your technical debt. Now, organization like NBC Universal, if you look at it, we have like a lot of different businesses that rolls within NBC Universal itself. So that keeps like performance engineering challenging. And what we do is like we make sure that the design requirements from a development standpoint, architecture standpoint, or even a functional business standpoint, they all meet the design requirements. It can be any design requirement, if you will. And then the proactive performance engineering practices, what we do is like, you know, we can either ship left or ship right, either into the development phases or even if there is issues in production, trying to see how we can enhance the practice or optimize the practice and try to bring it how? By virtualization and predictive modeling. So those are some of the three major pointers which I feel, you know, is the core behind the entire the positive impact what the performance engineering practice gets to us.
Great, thank you, Kishore. Brian, over to you.
So thank you, Kishore. So when I look at this, I look at this, if performance engineering is providing results and doing it well, organizations are going to begin to ask questions around, what am I doing for my culture? What am I doing for my software development lifecycle? We know that there are going to be new processes, accountabilities, and responsibilities are going to shift to support the whole process engineering concept. And it's very different than performance testing. You know, as one of my colleagues mentioned earlier, if you look at performance testing, it's really a check mark and a checkbox. Performance engineering is really looking at the whole end-to-end lifecycle and driving those results from engineering all the way to delivery. I also see if we're doing it right, the organizations are going to start to ask questions like, you know, is it dev test ops? Is it agile? Are we going to be looking at introducing training, or do we need more tools? If we're doing it right, we know that there's a strong and tight relationship between business and IT. And that's not to say that it doesn't happen in performance testing, but it really becomes tightened and it becomes very actionable right from the onset. We know that also too that questions are also going to surface around test data management. Now, test data management, yes, is used in pure performance testing again, but it's brought into that whole architectural phase, and you really get into simulation, and you really get into modeling and making sure that you have that data available so that you can take it right into your formal test execution activities. And it really starts an organizational transformation that allows you to architect, to address integrations designed with performance focuses. I've seen some challenges in this space because the organization is contemplating, okay, I know that I'm going to have to move through a cultural evolution, but I still need to get the book of business done from a performance test standpoint. We also, too, questions then surface around incorporating proactive monitoring, inspecting it through continuous delivery automation. So those in and of itself enable us to improve solution delivery and development and supply chain management. And I think those are some of the key results if performance engineering is doing it right and making an impact within the organization. Off to you, Andre.
If performance engineering is done well, there's a solid understanding of the performance metrics and a linkage to the performance requirements, a linkage between the performance requirements and business and engineering needs. And a consensus that we're doing performance engineering to mitigate risk but also to improve the quality of the product. As some of my colleagues have mentioned earlier, if we're doing engineering well, there's a very clear consensus about expectations about performance, and the proof of the pudding is going to be in timely delivery. Then we will have structured the system so as to be able to sustain planned growth and in the workload and also in the size of the user base. And the user base is not only the number of subscribers in an online processing system, but in a network management system, for example, it could be the number of nodes that are being managed, or an Internet of Things, the number of things that are being controlled and that need to communicate with one another. We're also going to improve system stability if we're doing performance engineering well, because performance tests can reveal system instability and give us an opportunity to fix it. And then finally, if we've done it well, we will have a cost-effective system that's sized to business and engineering needs and architected to allow for a defined growth path.
Thank you, Andre. Alan, over to you.
Again, in the context of using performance engineering for supplier selection, we get good results when we put together the team that you see there, from the supplier to the business owner, also involving procurement, supplier management, and the performance engineering team. The deliverable here is that we can actually take the service level agreement that's supported by the performance test results and get that written into the contract. So the technology we use for internal work is now sufficiently robust that we can use it as a contract vehicle to nail down the quality of service. Interestingly enough, the suppliers like this because they know exactly what they have to do to be able to get paid. It's not a matter of, gee, getting a call from a Boeing vice president saying, gee, it seems like the system's running kind of slow today, can you fix it? There are quantitative measures that we can reflect in the contract that they know they have to hit. The system owners like it because they understand and they can manage the level of risk they're willing to accept, and that becomes part of the negotiation. The obvious benefits include things like avoiding buying offerings that don't meet our quality of service criteria, but there are less obvious benefits that often manifest in rework or hammer to fit, where we've now bought a tool or an offering that doesn't quite meet our needs, and we're involved in creating bolt-ons or tailorings or creating adapters, which themselves take on a life of their own. The goal is that the deployment risks are both known and acceptable. Not known and acceptable to the performance engineers, known and acceptable to the business owners, that they understand based on the capability of the offering as measured in the performance engineering and performance testing, what risks they have moving forward. The benefit too is that, and I heard a number of my colleagues mention this, the suppliers actually get a chance to up their game. Because they're engaged in the disciplined approach here, they often end up with a better product that they can release for general offerings. And that's okay because we get a good product too. So that becomes the win-win situation here when this is done well. Back to you.
Thank you, Alan. And there's a number of areas that I think we could go in this brief group discussion. I guess picking a few of the ideas that I heard throughout, I heard culture mentioned, I heard metrics, and a lot of focus on end users. I do like the conversation around, bringing supplier management in early. And I know some of you guys have spoken about how you actually had a sandbox for your commercial off-the-shelf products come into as you're in vendor selection. But I think maybe first and foremost for me was this idea of, when done well, and what are those results, being able to focus on the culture of the organization and even how performance engineering and, maybe the metrics that are shown and that focus on the end user helps to shape the culture of an organization. So maybe we could just spend 2 or 3 minutes on that topic. And it's being done today within NBC University.
Yeah, so when done well, right? So if you think about performance engineering practice itself, it's a maturity model in itself. It's not like, okay, I have a one-stop shop, everything I'm like completely mature, right? So it's a maturity model that you grow along with your business and technological needs. And as you mature and as you do it right, what you're trying to do is, again, as I mentioned, like, a couple of items, right? So you are getting the quality product out. And when I say the quality product, I go back to, again, meeting the design requirements, be it the functional requirements, be it the stability requirements, the architectural design, because every single system that we talk about, it has got a requirement by itself, be it the design, be it the functionality, be it the business utilization or usage, however it is being done. End of the day, the end user experience, when it goes up and we reduce the number of production outages or bringing it as close to zero as possible, that means that your operational excellence and your cost in production, actually in operation, it goes down. So the proof of the pudding actually is just looking at the practices by itself. And it's not just the performance engineering team alone. It's a marriage of the overall activity throughout your SDLC, which is actually showcase what kind of product is being released in the market and how quick and how with the utmost quality as much as possible. So performance engineering obviously plays a major role. Situation. Go ahead, Doug.
Sorry, this is Andre. I think Kishore is really onto something here. One of the biggest problems that I've seen is explaining the need for quantifiable and measurable performance metrics to the stakeholders and helping them define their needs. That is a very large part of our task. Some stakeholders, like product managers, may be very reluctant to commit to actual numbers, and they may not even understand what their market segment is. And there are 2 ways that we can help them. One is to try and understand the performance metrics in terms of the user experience, and the other is to come up with a kind of reference workload or a reference scenario that they can hang on to so that there's something to talk about.
That is correct. So in a way, how we kind of like handle it, we try to handle it in a 2-phase manner, and it's pretty straightforward. We go and ask them, hey, do you have an NFR? What is your non-functional requirement? What is your SLA? What is your business looking to achieve from this? And most of the time, as Andre rightly mentioned, there is a reluctancy in providing that information. So if we don't get based on, if we don't get the requirement, the other way of looking at the sphere is, okay, based on your design requirement, this is exactly what your application is going to do, or this is exactly what your product is going to do. And it's not okay for you to do anything or deploy something in production, because here is the risk what you need to assess and manage proactively so that, it's not a total loss of service or whatever that we, come up with, right? So those are my 2 cents.
Go ahead, Kishore.
No, I'm done. Go ahead.
And I was going to say that also too that if we take what you're just discussing and we compartmentalize it and we cookie cut it and we're able to do it very well and do it in a very timely fashion. And we've all been in the conversations with the business, and we're having to, Andre, as you said, we're having to advocate for some type of performance execution, and we're challenged because the business or the product managers are really driving towards a timeline and a cost model. From a performance engineering standpoint, if we're doing it well, that debate and that negotiation goes away, and we're not knocking on their door to schedule meetings to ensure that that quality is built in. They're coming to us and demanding that it gets incorporated into their overall project delivery cycle because they've seen the quantitative metrics being met. They've seen the quality coefficient rise. They've seen that there are less production defects being impacted by our deliveries and then in turn impacting our customer base.
This makes a lot of sense. And the challenge that we as performance engineers face is being able to relate our metrics to the business owner's metrics. There's no point in me spending a lot of time talking about throughput metrics or scalability metrics to a vice president of finance. It's not relevant. But if I can relate that to the availability of the system, to better reliability, if I can show that testing early will prevent outages, will minimize rework. Even in the more ethereal things like scalability, if I can demonstrate that if the system scales well, it means that you're not going to have to buy as much capital equipment as you add users to the system. So a lot of this is incumbent upon us as performance professionals to be able to take our metrics and map those back to business metrics where we can possibly tie what we do to the bottom line. That cements our relationship and our use to the corporation.
Well said.
Alan, thank you very much for tying that one off. I think not only does that help kind of shape the direction, but it also very nicely tees up our next poll. So this is polling question number 3. Hopefully we'll get everybody to quickly click and vote here. So if we can go ahead and open the poll. As you can see, the question is, why are organizations focusing on performance engineering as a competitive differentiator? You just heard all 4 of the expert panelists kind of provide some ideas and thoughts about when done well. And I think Alan was kind of even pushing us in this direction. But please go ahead and select as many as you need. We've got revenue, brand value, competitive advantage, customer acquisition, and also customer retention of your existing customers. So these were the answers that we came up with as we put this together for you. So Pitar, I'll hand it over to you to manage this poll.
Hey, great, excellent. About 50% voted at the moment. We'll let this bump a little bit yet. What's interesting to me is that this particular poll harkens back to a previous webinar we did with the group, and I think it's going to measure out quite well. We'll see how this shapes up here in about 15 seconds. We're at about 70% at the moment, maybe just a little bit more. If anyone's out there that wants to vote, get it in now. Okay, looks like we've rounded off. Let's go ahead and close this one out. And for this particular question, we've got the tied leaders at brand value and customer retention. Then finally, competitive advantage fell back at 77%. Then revenue at 47%, and customer acquisition at 40%. So it lines up pretty much with our previous poll.
It's pretty interesting to see that, Pitar. The numbers have not really shifted around too much. I guess, Andre, as somebody who's in the performance engineering space, somebody who's got the years and the organizations of experience under your belt, and you're now in a pretty high-profile consulting role. What do you think about these results that we got from this poll?
I think the emphasis on customer retention is very interesting because it's much easier to get business from a customer you have than it is to acquire one. And it suggests to me that there's an awareness of the sensitivity of customers to response time and so on. And that's actually something that's been understood for a while. Companies like Keynote Systems in the early days of the web produced research showing that if customers got impatient with one website, they would go to a competitor's to get the same service.
Great points. So we're going to move fairly quickly now into, how can you get started implementing things like performance engineering now? And Kishore, I know you had a couple ideas that you wanted to share with us here.
Sure. So something that I keep talking to, myself and, my team of engineers and testers is, number one, the solution, what we think about, should be tool agnostic, because many a times I've seen like testers getting stuck with a particular tool and saying there is a limitation with the tool. Rather, it's not a solution what we think about. So we need to, as performance engineers, my thing is we need to start thinking about a tool agnostic solution however we can. And there are many great ideas that can be looked at. And the second thing is mature from a simple performance testing organization to a performance engineering organization. And I mean, like, there are great examples on the internet as to what a performance testing is and what a performance engineering is. And obviously, number three, evangelizing your performance engineering practices across the organizations, because there are a lot of times where I have seen organizations get stuck with just the development community saying, okay, I need a bigger development cycle, which is understood, but we need to evangelize and say, I'll be your value add as to whatever you're developing. So with that said, these are the three great points that I, kind of think of always. So on to you, Todd.
Thanks, Kishore. So some of the things that, in thinking about this, and we were challenged a little bit here at Biogen. When performance engineering started, we kind of came at it sideways, and the organization really needed to take a step back and put an appropriate strategy and roadmap in place. And if I were to say, in looking at how to start it, start out with a strategy with very specific metrics and objectives that can be met over a period of time. I've seen too many organizations pull together a plan, and the strategy and the objectives are too aggressive. They fail, and performance engineering or performance testing then in turn obtains a black eye and is really stuck in the mud and in a position not to move forward. So, first and foremost, define a strategy. Put the lines in the sand and make them so that you can accomplish them. Start small and then continue to build with a common core framework. Some of the key concepts from a performance engineering standpoint that are a little bit different than performance testing: being in a position to identify defects in real time, both in pre-prod and in production across various infrastructure stacks. And I'm not talking just across one single platform and one single application. This is really taking that horizontal slice and developing a performance engineering regression suite that hits that holistic sweet spot across various portfolios. Come at the plan and look at your strategy with the key goal throughout the way as the culture changes and the evolution and the implementation of performance engineering is maturing. You want to have the mindset of continuously reducing your mean time to repair to increase ROI using continuous delivery automation and promote optimal workflow productivity. And this again talks back to being in a position where you can use automation and start at those early infrastructure build and design phases and then mature it as the product evolves all the way to production. And last but not least, increase application availability and quality with global transparency. This whole concept of one click, one touch, one happy customer, that's ultimately your vision of where the engineering concept is started very early on, and whether it be through an automated task or a manual task, you start the process with, again, the vision being that one happy customer. And lastly, you're holistically looking to engineer quality throughout the software development lifecycle, push of a button versus testing it into the application at the very tail end. That's the final closing comment. Off to you, Andre.
Andre, do you have some thoughts in this area too?
I'm sorry, I was muted. We need to understand which performance metrics indicate a good customer experience. But touching on some of the points that Byron and Kishore made, we need to have performance requirements expressed in measurable and unambiguous terms. That's also important for the contracting process that Alan was talking about. But we need to map between the performance requirements and the choices of the architecture and implementation technologies. And by that, I mean that we want to make sure that we are architecting the system to leverage the scalability that the new kinds of technologies and platforms afford us. At a very elementary level, you can have a box with 1,000 processors in it, but if your application is single-threaded, the other 9,999 won't do you any good. Similarly, if you want to leverage an expandable and dynamically variable cloud technology with multiple instances of containers, you need to architect your system so that you can make use of that and link that architectural choice back to the performance requirements and the kind of scalability that you want to achieve. And then you want to test over your performance requirements over a range of loads to make sure that your system is going to scale and behave in a scalable manner as you would have expected, and that these and by that I mean that you're going to follow various basic modeling rules, that your system behavior is going to follow basic modeling rules when you do measurement. And then finally, you want to monitor your system in production and model the workloads so that you can anticipate growth and scale your system up and deploy new resources accordingly.
Thank you, Andre. I think you might be the first to mention containers so far today, but you're right. That can be a significant opportunity as well as a challenge. Maybe that's another webinar. And I know, Alan, I'm just looking ahead to your slide here, and on your last point, you mentioned checklist. So I know that not everyone probably participating in this webinar has had the opportunity to hear you speak about it. So I would love to have you share this with the community now.
I would be delighted. Thank you. And I'm very humbled by my colleagues here. It's a wonderful brain trust here. Again, in the context of supplier evaluation and this ultimate shift left we've been talking about, my advice to you is partner with procurement and supplier management. This is a bit of a challenge because it's not the traditional role for those of us in the IT field. It's essential, though, because now there are legal and contractual implications in the performance engineering work. So you need to make sure that that's properly leveraged and well posed. To ensure that we're treating all suppliers equally, we have a checklist in which we record the quality of service criteria and what it would take for a supplier to meet them. This gives us a quantitative way of scoring suppliers. If a supplier meets the criteria, they get a checkbox and it's scored appropriately. If they offer an alternative to our criteria, we still consider it, but then it's our role as performance engineers to translate that into any residual risk in terms that our business owner can understand. So if we've asked for the supplier to be able to provide this and they can't quite provide that, that results in a risk, and we translate that to the business owner, and then we act as the go-between until the supplier has something that they can operate on and the business owner understands the risk that they're accepting by the supplier proposing an alternate to that criteria. Advantage here is that it enables us to translate an IT issue into a business decision. And ultimately, that's the role that the performance engineers have to play, is to be able to relate how we are contributing to the business goals of the organization. Back to you, Todd.
Thank you, Alan. And for our discussion, I think just, looking at the clock and recalling in our prep discussions, one of the biggest things or biggest hurdles is, how to get started in implementing now. One of the things that I heard resoundingly from all four of our panelists was to actually just get started doing something now and finding these ways that leveraging the ideas that each of them have shared to find out which way you could get started, even if it is a small way, but showing these performance metrics, tying it to business value, and just start showing those results. I don't know, I guess, Brian, you probably haven't had an opportunity yet. Is there anything else, if you were just to drop in one point here as to how to get started implementing now, that you would suggest?
I think it's having that upper level partnership, having a senior level sponsor, being in a position to support the concept and assist in those negotiations, not only with the IT organization, but more importantly, the business constituents. I think that's key because we get barriered because there isn't a complete understanding of the goals and objectives, and if we don't have that top-down leadership support, the organization kind of sits and debates, and that's not what we're looking to do. We really want to look and grow the organization and mature the concept to provide that quality delivery.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. With that, we will go to our last and final poll question, which is question number 4. So if we can go ahead and launch that now. What is preventing you from implementing performance engineering now? Again, you can select as many as relevant for you. Budget, time, priority, understanding, and ability being the 5 potential responses. So Petar, I'll hand it to you to manage this polling question.
Okay, great. It looks like everyone's filing in quite quickly. We're already at about 45%. Yeah, this one's kind of interesting. I would have expected so far a more, I guess, pinpointed problem area, but we'll see here. It's flattening out. Quite interesting. About another 15 seconds. Looks like things are locking in. Okay, go ahead and cap this one. And then what we have here is the big winner is actually, the problem is time at 61%. And then it comes down into priority past that, then an even split between budget and understanding at 50%, and then finally ability at 25%. So as usual, it's a time crunch.
Interesting. I guess, Alan, as you look at that, the time crunch at 61%, is that what you would have expected to have seen, or would you have thought something else from this poll?
No, actually, that's quite common. Very often, and a number of my colleagues have pointed this out, very often until performance engineering becomes part of the system development lifecycle, often we're the guys that get called before the system goes out the door. We used to get calls many years ago, I'm going to release my system in 2 weeks. Can you do some testing and tell me it's okay? Well, if I can't do testing in 2 weeks, what happens if I can't tell you it's okay? So the time crunch is always the issue, and the way we've gotten around that is prioritizing the risk factors and marching down the list from the highest priority to the least priority. That gives you the opportunity of showing value to the business side and saying, if we had a little more time, we could address these other remaining risks that you had. Nobody wants to do a bad job on the business side, and if you could quantify and relate the time they give you to the value you're giving them back in terms of avoiding outages, finding and fixing problems before the users do, often the time schedule opens up a bit. But in the meantime, even if there is a time crunch, you've covered the most important problems or the most likely problem areas, and you could still show value. So that's one way we've worked around the time constraint.
Great points. And, I think as you're able to adopt performance engineering practices, like I've heard all of you suggest, it just means that you're able to bring these capabilities in and even build them in much, much earlier so that hopefully time being an issue later in the cycle is no longer the issue. Again, looking through all the topics that we've covered, the what, the when, the how, all the 4 polls that we've done, I don't know, I know we're kind of at the top of the hour right now, but do you guys have any other closing thoughts that you'd want to share? And maybe we'll just go very quickly, through. I do have a few other content slides to cover before we wrap. Kishore, do you have any final closing thoughts?
The final closing thought that I have is just do it. I mean, it's a great saying, just do it. So it's us, performance engineers, who have to do it.
Brian, anything from you?
No.
I echo that. I think it's pulling together the approach, socializing the concept, and make it a priority. And if it has to move to it becoming docked as a formal project within the PMO, so that it attracts the support and visibility and funding that's required, that is an option and an approach that I've used previously, and then it grows as it does mature within the organization into the QA or the quality SQA divisions within an organization.
And Andre?
I'd like to return to a point that Byron made earlier, which is that you need to have a mandate from senior management in order to assure participation among all stakeholders. But that by itself is not enough. One has to work with individual sets of stakeholders and develop small success stories that will attract the attention of senior management so that they're willing to put themselves behind that kind of a mandate. And it can take a long time to persuade an organization to do that, but when it works, it can be wonderful.
Alan, any closing thoughts?
A couple. Again, I'm humbled by my colleagues here. 2 pieces of advice: shift left. The technology in performance engineering has now matured to the point where you can get involved earlier and earlier in the cycle. That's where you're going to have the maximum benefit and the maximum visibility. And so what you provide is more than technical value, it's business value. Talk to your leaders in terms of the business value, the benefits they're going to derive in terms of better availability, less outages, better first-time quality, the ability to release sooner because you're not doing rework. Sell it in terms of the business value, not just in terms of the technical capabilities. Back to you.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone, again, for those contributions. There's a lot of different areas that I could point you to get some more information. Here's 4 that were just top of mind for myself and also this team. You can see at the top, if you're interested in learning more about HPE and the software performance engineering capabilities, there's a URL for you. If you've not heard about Tech Beacon yet, I would encourage everyone to go out and check it out quickly. It is an HPE-sponsored site, but I will tell you that 95% of our contributors are non-HPE people. They are all practitioners like yourself. Great content out there. I just got an alert that I had a 4 Myths of Containers article that published today. So you can go out and check that out. Some of the blogs that might be of interest to you for Load Runner Performance Center, you can see the bit.ly link there. And then lastly, I had shown it to you at the top of the webinar, but this is the link to go to the Performance Engineering SIG and to learn more about that special interest group that we're leading. Discover 2016 is coming to Las Vegas in just a few short weeks. You can see all the way at the bottom. This is a special registration link for Vivint members. Again, you can get a discount there, but would encourage you all to click on that link and learn a little bit more. You can see we're going to have over 10,000 attendees there, a lot of different people available for you to speak and meet with. I've also written a blog on all of the performance engineering related sessions that we will be doing. I'm going to be hosting at least 3 of them formally, and I'm sure many more informally. One of the things we're doing uniquely in 2016 are having these monthly performance engineering SIG webinars. The feedback that we've been getting has been great, and we, as the 4 leaders of this group, love being able to bring this type of content to you. You can see here we've done 5 of these now, and there's actually the opening blog that we had done back in January as well. I also want to give all of the folks listening and participating today the opportunity to volunteer to speak with us, bringing your knowledge and experience and sharing it with the performance engineering community. You can see the link at the bottom there for the Google Forms. Simply fill that out, and would love to reach out to you and contact you as we're building some of our next sessions. This is our last slide. I know we're just a few minutes over. Appreciate all of you hanging in there. Again, want to thank not only the 4 expert panelists, also Petar, and also the team behind it helping to manage this webinar. But on behalf of Vivid Worldwide, on behalf of the Performance Engineering Special Interest Group, thank you all for participating in this webinar and learning a little bit more about how performance engineering is being used as a competitive differentiator today. Thank you and goodbye.